brought to you by Brass and Unity. We make wearable conversation starters. Our new Buddy Check packs are available now. Grab one and check on one of your closest buddies. They may need it now more than ever. Go to brassandunity.com, use the code UNITY, and get 20% off. And let's all heal together. And brought to you by Combat Flip-Flops. Bad for running and even worse for fighting. Combat Flip-Flops are your ticket to the unarmed forces by providing you with military-inspired quality footwear for men and women. To help support the podcast and in support of women in developing countries, head over to combatflipflops.com and become a part of their unarmed forces today. Be sure to use the code UNITY at checkout and get 25% off. And brought to you by GFDA. Good fucking design advice. The voice in your head and the foot up your ass. GFDA makes prints, drinkware, and apparel for people who want to do their fucking best. Go and use the code UNITY and get 10% off now on anything on their site, including our collaborative product, Fucking Help Somebody. And brought to you by Daisy May Hat Co., the custom hat company based in Nashville, Tennessee. They make custom one-of-a-kind hats from wide-brimmed fedoras to cowboy hats. All of their hats are 100% beaver felt, and it's the highest quality hat you can get. They also have the coolest shirts ever. You can use the code BRASS at checkout for 15% off your entire order. Go and check out daisymayhats.com. Embrace the fever. Live the dream. And brought to you by American Yogi. In a world increasingly driven toward the grind, find your outlet for peace. American Yogi is a mindfulness-based apparel and wellness brand with international retreats, free classes, and rad clothing and accessories to support you along life's journey. Find American Yogi on Instagram at Live American Yogi or at AmericanYogi.com. American Yogi is proud to support the Brass and Unity podcast and its community with the code BRASS15. Join the mindful counterculture. Live American Yogi. And brought to you by Mindful Meds. You guys have been seeing me take Mindful Meds for a little while now. Mindful Meds is a premium supplement company dedicated to supplying humans with the tools to improve their mental health, clarity, and performance, all while supporting their growth along the way. Whether it's the Immunity Blend, Lion's Mane, Inspire, or Voyage, all of their products are clean, tested, consistent, and they've become a huge help in my life. I found Mindful Meds over a year ago now, and I've never looked back. Go check out their website, mindfulmeds.io, and use the code BRASS at checkout. Hey humans, I know you've all been seeing me drink HVMN's Ketone IQ lately. This is a game changer. Jet fuel in a bottle. I use Ketone IQ for everything in my life, whether it's running, cycling, podcasting, or just the extra boost that my brain needs. I won't lie, it helps push me to the next level in all things. I love Ketone IQ and what HVMN stands for. Go grab some shots today at hvmn.com and use the code BRASS20 and save.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode. I'm sitting with Kyle Morgan. A lot of you have been hearing about this man. He's the founder of Blue Bearing Solutions, as well as a former special operator for over 20 years. Since 9/11, he has been a kinetic operator, and he has been someone who has been in the public eye the past little bit with some very intense stories, with a lot of lessons learned, and really just moving forward and showing the way, leading from the front, as we all say. And I'm really excited to have you on, Kyle, because you and I have started to get to know each other over the past couple of weeks, fortunately through a mutual friend, Mark Turner, who runs the Overwatch Foundation, which I know you are involved in. And he said to me, hey, Kelsey, I know people don't like to have suggestions, but there's somebody that you should have on the show. There's somebody that you really do need to have a conversation with. And his name is Kyle Morgan. I kind of sat back and went, how do I know this guy? And I'm like, Sean, that's how I know this guy. And then I started to listen and dive into your story a little bit. And then I realized that you really do stand out amongst the special operations for a lot of reasons, but mainly, I think, and notably, it would be the Mali attack in 2015. And we'll get into that. But first and foremost, thanks for coming on the show. Thank you for your years of sacrifice and service towards keeping people alive and safe. It seems like you have done your part and then some.
Well, Kelsey, thank you. I think it's great to join you on this platform, on your platform with Brass and Unity, and all you stand for and what you're doing for our communities. I think I just pay attention to who I introduce into my life at the current juncture, and then moving forward, like what you're feeding your being, and like Mark Turner, for example, he did the same with me and connected you and I. and I just finished a weekend of training for Overwatch Foundation, which is why my voice is kind of gone. Not that I was yelling at him, but it was just, we crammed a lot of instruction into a weekend, and it was a really good event. And I was completely laid up yesterday, just like licking my wounds, because I do put my heart and soul into everything that I do as far as professionally. And I'm trying to make sure that amount of energy that comes more natural to me goes into how I live my life and my personal life. But no, thank you for having me.
Of course, you've made some major changes in the past little bit, and you've really stood up and, I don't want to say corrected mistakes, but whether we like it or not, the special operations community has an upwards of 94% divorce rate, especially if you're in for a long period of time. And it seems to be the truth when I do start having these conversations with individuals in the community. It is very often a similar start. They served for X amount of time. They are on X amount of divorces, and children are kind of being shared between one another. And more often than not, it gets ugly very quickly. You have a different way of looking at your family, and you have a different way of moving yourself forward. And it's something I'd like to kind of touch on and really start with, instead of going right into the special operations, which I know everybody listening wants to hear all of the stories and how you've grown. But I want to kind of touch on why you are the way you are and how we got to the point where in 2003 you started deploying. So let's start from the beginning. What was your life like as a kid? Because to become a top tier special operator the way you are, you have to be cut from a very different cloth.
Well, I mean, I think that, I was born in 1984, and the best year of this last generation, I think. But I think a lot of good things happened in 84, I believe. No, but all kidding aside, like I grew up in, I was born in Central Florida, but the common theme throughout my whole childhood was there was no stability when it came to planning routes anywhere. Like, I think I moved from Florida to New York, and then New York to Virginia for a while, and then back to Florida for all high school. And that's where I joined the Army from. But the one thing that I know have impacted my ability to plant roots, like having some stability. And I see this as I've raised my children, and where there are areas that I know I failed them, or I could have done significantly better. I know that I was able to provide them stability, and in the military, which is, I think, huge, which I didn't get, which I think that is one of the main contributing factors to me never really feeling comfortable for too long in one place. And then I'm like, I got to fuck this up, or I got to change it, or go do something else. And that's kind of how my military career was, changing from job to job, always looking for more. And, I think looking back at my childhood, though, the stability piece is so for any of our children, because, without the stability, they can't ever really, they don't know how much to invest or to trust in people or in institutions, or recreational, like sport teams and all these things. And it's one of the things I think stability is huge, and I wasn't afforded that. But I will say this, because it just reminded me of how I've parented my whole adult life, trying to figure out. I didn't have a mother or father to emulate, to say, hey, this is what a good mother or a good father looks like. So for me, I looked at my kids sometimes in my past, and I was just like, well, they don't know how bad it could be.
Right.
So, and that's kind of like, whether I said it inside my head or the way that it projected, I didn't outright say that to them, but it was very much like looking back at it, I'm like, why should they? why should they know how bad it could be?
Mhm.
That's me still dealing with my own shit. So, look, moving forward, I try to keep that into perspective whenever I'm doing, like, they don't need to know how bad it could be. My job is to provide and protect them and help develop them, and regardless of how I was raised. So, but just to talk about my childhood a little bit, I mean, the stability wasn't there. The stability from, like, they, for whatever reason or another, it's a misprioritization of resources, whatever. My parents would just, like, this whole, like, rent-a-center thing, like we'd have these nice things, but then they would disappear, just like cars and TVs and this and that. I'm like, what is this? There was no stability with internal to the home as well.
Oh, wow.
Not just like moving home to home.
What did
And
your
I'm
parents
like,
do? Sorry, what did your parents do for a living? What was their
so
profession?
my dad grew up doing construction, like concrete roof tile in Florida, and then he did that up in New York and in Virginia for a while. But then, so construction basically. So he kind of went to where the bigger jobs were, and but then those would dissipate, and so we would move again or whatever. My mother, the only times I ever remember her working was if we needed, like, medical insurance for something. So she would work for a period of time to get us, like, some sort of medical coverage, and then, but she was very much like, I think the jobs that she held were just like at gas stations or freaking just minimum wage jobs. And she was, like, very much a stay-at-home mother. And
You have siblings?
yeah, I have a sister that her and I grew up together. She's older, a little bit older than me, but and my brother is my half brother from my father. So we didn't grow up together, but him and I have actually reconnected, and we reconnected later on, like before I joined the Army, and then recently, like last year, reconnected when I was doing TBI treatment out in San Diego. He lives out there. He actually works for the sheriff's office now.
Oh, nice.
So he's really helped me like want to believe in family, and outside of my family that I've fostered here, my wife and children, it's been very 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 hard to trust any of that, right? Because regardless of, like, the way I was raised, like, I've always wanted to help others, and it started with wanting to help them, and almost in an unhealthy way, almost a codependency that I was raised in,
Right.
where my mother was codependent on the children, and my father, never left. But I know that I held a lot of I don't know, angst or resentment towards him growing up, because he would like come home every night or whatever, and then go to the garage and tinker, to avoid the my mother was extremely jealous and abusive. Like, she would verbally and physically, and he would just sit in the garage and drink. And so it really helped. I wasn't really close with him growing up. So there was a lot I could have learned from him, but I viewed him as kind of like, he's just kind of there.
Can I ask, can I pry a little bit about that?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because with your mom, it's worth highlighting. A lot of individuals, especially men, and I think being that my listeners are 86% men, I want to really touch on this. You said something that we don't hear very often, or whether people want to have that conversation or not. It happens. Women abusing men is a real thing. I've seen it before in the community. I've seen individuals who have been married, and due to maybe the way that they have been raised, or due to the stressors put on within the special operations community and what it means to be married to a special operator, that manifests itself in other ways. And that can be alcoholism that turns into physical and psychological abuse towards spouses. And that can go both ways. And I think there's this perception that it is that men are always abusing women. Women are just and can be just as at fault and just as dangerous and just as violent and just as damaging. And I think it's worth acknowledging because it doesn't happen every time. But when it does happen, there is this stigma around men that they cannot admit it or they cannot talk about it. Because if they were to acknowledge that a woman that was maybe smaller than them, a woman that was maybe their wife, that's supposed to be the loving, caring companion in a relationship, the fact that she can abuse a man is often just not a conversation that's heard of. And number one, I'm sorry that that happened to you. I'm sorry that that had to be the witness and the example of what a woman is in a relationship, because that leaves long lasting scars and trust issues. But I'm just sorry from a perspective of being a mother and being a wife and understanding how damaging and how much that can hurt long term. We do need to be more patient and kind and open to men coming out and saying that there has been abuse towards them, and not just, hey, there's been emotional abuse, but if there's physical abuse, something needs to happen. Somebody needs to step in. But I've seen it in Canada, and I've seen it with individuals where men have reported abuse from women and it's not believed. They just don't believe it at all. Well, how could a big guy like you take abuse or violence from a woman that small? I'm not saying it was me, but I'm just saying like a 5'5", 150-pound woman versus a 6'2", 280 kind of guy. It happens, but it takes a lot of constraint to not hit back. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the part where, like, looking at my father, he was kind of that battered husband, man. And, but I will say that he never left. Like, he never left us. And with my adult lens, looking back now, I admire that about him. And he had his own issues and still does, but the fact that he put up with her, I mean, it was so bad to where like he couldn't even, if we went to eat somewhere, like at a steakhouse or whatever, and if he looked up and was like looking towards the direction of a waitress, like she would just make a scene and say that he was like, what are you looking at her? Blah, like just so jealous and so like, it was just, but that to me, like that was normalized, and right. We couldn't really, I was like, oh, I'm making a scene again. And if we were at home, like things would just fly across the table at dinner or whatever. And they were trying, that's for sure. I mean, if you on the surface, if you looked at the way that we had Christmas, they would literally like made sure we had the nicest whatever clothes that but not pay this bill or that bill. It was very superficial on the surface. And I think that was just a matter of like, my mom used to have to like put her face on, when she'd go out in public, she'd have to look a certain way. And to me, like that really, but she was also like somebody that nobody could fuck with me. Like she protected me more than, and that's where I was like a mama's boy in that sense. Because, she was extremely, like smothering, but at the time, like affectionate. And, to me, I think that was the definition of how you display or show love, for one another. And, it's taken me years to figure out, how much all of that played into how I've tried to parent myself or how I've conducted my own self and behaviors. And, I think that there's other elements of the childhood where like from my first visual memory I was traumatized. My father's father, so my grandfather on that side, molested my sister.
Jesus Christ. I didn't see that coming. I'm so sorry.
Well, that's all right. And it's that was my first visual memory at 5, 6 years old. And that fractured everything for me when it came to who I can trust, like what, like sexual relationships, period. And in the same, you know, they didn't protect me, us, period. And we just ran away from it. And that's where I felt like we've always just kind of ran away from when things get really hard, and I it's definitely something I could never talk about. I'm not going to go into depth on it. But it wasn't just, him molesting her. He also molested me. And it's one of those things that you don't think it's ever going to affect you or your family, but you have to be able to protect your children and internally, and externally to the environment that they bring them to. And I think that's where, if I look at how I could never, I learned to gauge people's, like, the atmosphere, the emotional intelligence, whatever. I learned that very early on because it was a self-defense mechanism. Like, I had to figure out, because my emotional state was so directly connected to theirs. So I learned to read that very, very early on and be a people pleaser, right? Or give them what they need, not what I need. So I think that is another element to how I've just lived my life up till more recently.
Was it your dad's dad or was it your mom's dad?
This is my father's father.
Okay. So I guess I'm just wondering why, because your mom's behavior in terms of how she reacted to things, that just, when I think about her, the jealousy levels and then her overreaction, her throwing things across the room, those types of behaviors, it's like that's trauma. That's just trauma bleeding on everyone else, right? That's her life not being treated a certain way or being treated a certain way, just bleeding out as a mother. The example that she was shown, right, is no different than her reaction in the way that you were shown. And it's when there's this thing I learned recently. There's a doctor named Dr. John Deloney. We had him on the podcast not that long ago. Brilliant man, brilliant man of God, somebody who really leans into his family hard, but also acknowledges the difficulties that he's had as a parent or being a parent and the learning lessons. And, he said something to me. He's like, like trauma, obviously, when you don't deal with it, you bleed on everyone else around you. But also when a parent leans on a child, when a parent is overbearing and smothering like that, that caused this helicopter parenting. All that does is place anxiety on the children. All it does is remove anxiety from the adult and place it onto the children. And then the children live for that parent and the parent lives for that child. And then when children leave the home or grow up or, go off, or if you're just a stay-at-home mom, and I say sorry about that. I didn't mean it that way. I've been a stay-at-home mom. I can't do it. I've tried. It is the hardest job in all of the world to raise humans properly. And I kind of, it's not that I checked out, but I started working again because the idea of just being home hurt my brain physically. I could not cope with it. And I learned a long time ago that children feel everything. When I'm having a bad day, my son will communicate with me in the same frustrations I'm feeling about whatever the situation is. He will then pick up on that energetically without me saying words, and he will then have a bad day. How I choose to show up is how he will choose to show up and interact with us. And so when you, as a parent, helicopter parent your child, don't ever let them get hurt, smother them with all of those things, and really just protect them from the world instead of allowing small dose adversity to hit them so that when real life hits them, they can handle it. You become this, not obsessive, but all encompassing. All that matters is the parent. And selfishly, that's what your parents did to you. And it seems like your father from the outside was a very, because if there was assault towards you and your child, you and your sister, that doesn't fall far, right? If your father was in the presence of that person, it sounds like that's why not only was your mom causing trauma and other things, but it sounds like your dad never coped with some of the things that most likely happened to him. Mm-hmm. Did you ever talk to your parents? Have you ever sat down now as a grown adult and talked to your parents about their life and why they are maybe the way they are?
Well, we're going to open a whole nother can of worms.
We're doing all the
that's
worms.
Fine. I think that it's a good, there's really no easy way to describe this other than just to start chronologically. So,
okay.
Like, we obviously we both moved out. I left when I was 18, and, my mother signed the dotted line for me to join the Army. And initially they were super supportive of what I was doing in the Army, but like my first paychecks that I saved in the basic training and AIT and all that, I gave all of it to my family. And because that's just that codependency that I was raised in about we always help the family, and it but then it became so toxic for me as a young man trying to create something in my own family. And I think they all started to see that I'm doing things and trying to, better myself, but they would continue to try to like inject themselves into it. And then it was causing so much of a issue with my wife and I married into having Ethan. He was 3 and turned 4 when we were dating, and then we got married, and then we had Kyla, which she's 17 now. But if you fast forward, so there was a lot of like the way I was raised with my family, and then trying to start my own family, and it was just causing a lot of like friction, and for the right reasons, because Erica is the most stable thing I've ever had in my life, my wife, and the strongest person I've ever known. But very proud people, that I grew up with. And we don't talk about our own problems with other people and this other shit. We figure it out internally. And I think, so I kind of just ran away from it, right? Like for a few years. And because every time I would bring my mom into it or my sister, like it would just like unravel, because it's just, they're all very unhealthy people. And it really, my world kind of turned upside down looking back at my military career or my adult life around 2006, when I was in the Special Forces Q course, qualification course. And Erica found a mugshot of my mother online. Like a mugshot, right? She had Jesus. 2 black eyes. She looked like strung out. And for me, I was like, what in the fuck is this? Because my mother never drank or used drugs growing up. Like, she just didn't. And when I saw that, I was like, immediately started trying to figure out like what's going on. And long story short is I found out that she left my father for a man like 10 years younger, and that it had been going on for 4 months or 5 months at that point. And all of our stuff that was from our childhood was put into some sort of like a storage unit. Mm-hmm. And they let it, and they didn't pay it or whatever. So it got auctioned off. All of this happened within like a 6-month time period where no one told me when it initially happened. So I was hurt by that, and I couldn't really explain how I felt other than I was angry. But I know looking back, I was like, it was betrayal, it was abandonment, it was all these things where they didn't feel like they could have, because I could have rectified some of that. So I don't have any of my memory, all the memories that we had from childhood. Now everything is just I remember all the bad,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I don't have any of the photos or the trophies and like all these things that, you know, I think are so important, but I didn't realize how important they were until now. But looking back on it, like this woman that I, you know, put on this pedestal was very much like a facade.
Mm-hmm.
And right there, she was my protector, right? So like she was the person that wouldn't let anyone fuck with me. And it's the way I was raised. And when I saw that, it really turned my world upside down. And I didn't realize that at the time. But you know, this is me looking back at the start point of like a lot of the behaviors that I developed over time. You know, obviously started from childhood, but then that was kind of the point as an adult where I just went away and I was like, well, fuck them, fuck them. And because immediately I'm going to go down there and kill this motherfucker,
Right.
whoever that this other guy was. And Eric is like, nope, we need you. You're not doing that. And I was like, okay. and so what I did was avoid. I just went, all right, fuck that. Because I tried and it was causing all kinds of, because my mother was in such denial. And I could go down the years, but the bottom line is that she is still doing those same things to this day. So that was a really long way of answering. I haven't had the ability to have that conversation with her.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I'm necessarily ready for it, but I do know that it's something that I need to have at some point, because I don't know how many other chances that she has, you know, because she's already OD'd, I don't know, 3 times. And, you know, the last time, like, well, if I back up, like the last like real conversation, I won't even say real, the last like conversation that lasted more than a minute was in 2016. So the Molly thing happened in 2015, into 16. I came home, moved out. Like I was in probably the worst place of my life. And, you know, I'm obviously trying to open up those doors to my mother or my father or any family. And where I couldn't communicate with Erica in that space, in a healthy way. And, but I'm also drinking, and my mother calls me and she's asking me for money or for whatever. And then she starts talking to me like it was very triggering to me, because she started talking to me like I remember talking to my father. And she was like, you're a piece of shit. Like, you only care about your family. You don't care about us. Like, you think you're better than everybody, all these things, man. And I was just like, hey, and I said this, and this was very much an injury to my own self, because I didn't mean it, but I damn sure believed I did, where I was like, I'm not my father, and then I will come down there and fuck you up.
Jesus.
And I mean, that's just like that's the mind space, the headspace I was in during that time. Anyways, I no longer believe that what I was doing in the military was like, it was about something bigger than me. But man, that thing bigger became like a job or like an identity. And then when that was challenged, like why I was still alive, and science didn't really make sense so many times over. And I just was in dealing with evil, like pure evil. I was like, I must just be more evil than them, because if I go back, because that's how I'm still here. And so that's the whole like monster inside of me that I believe it was on the surface for a very like long time, 2016, and then elements throughout the 6-7 years beyond. But part of that goes back to like powerlessness and being, and if I wasn't in control, like I got hurt. So I just had to be in control and give everybody in my life, like, thought they were close to me, but they never were. Like I gave them this sense of like letting them in, but I never let anyone fully in because I was too scared to look inside of there.
Well,
So
when you grew up, the way you grew up, that doesn't shock me. Nothing you're saying is like, oh, X, Y equals Z. I mean, it makes
besides I'll fuck my mom up kind of thing.
Besides, well, listen, I never thought I'd hear that out of your mouth. But that's the thing, though. People do not understand. Listeners do not understand. If you've never been put in the position where control has been taken from you and you've been harmed and you've been hurt for the most formative years of your existence, it's going to create something in you. And whether that's a wall, whether that's this darkness to protect yourself, if only because nobody else was there to protect you, even though you saying your mom was there to protect you, there was an element of that wasn't. She was a protector, but on the flip side, depending on her mood, she was also the thing causing the pain. And when you have that as your environment that you grow up in, that is how your brain wires. And it doesn't shock me when you say, like, I didn't want to look inward. I didn't want to see that darkness. Well, I'll be honest, that darkness is what kept you alive for a long time. That darkness is what held you together and is the reason why you're still sitting here right now in existence. Because if it didn't, there's moments in combat where you either show up or you become the liability. It's that simple. And that darkness very often is the reason why a lot of people don't become the liability. It's the switch. It's that light switch that turns on and everything else turns off and you can go and execute and you don't have feeling about it because it's you or them. And when people are like, well, I don't understand, like, I'm going to small tangent here. I had somebody recently DM me, somebody fairly famous DM me and go, you're what's wrong with the world. You fight other people's wars. And I just respond with, you do not understand what it feels like to look into someone's eyes that has just murdered tons of people and has no shame about it. You have no idea what pure evil, and I mean to the depths of our humanity, looks like. So when people say, how could you go do that? How could you go X, Y, and Z? How could you go take life off this planet? You do it because it's you or them. And you're able to do it because of the way you were raised. Whether we like it or not, somebody that comes from a house that's super loving, that never has conflict, that has tons of money, that's comfortable. You don't see those motherfuckers out there shooting people in the face to protect other strangers. You don't, because there is something that happens as children when we are around tumultuous situations, heavy situations, stuff that, like, what is my favorite? Dr. Phil says, do not put adult problems on small minds. That's what happens when you grow up in environments like that. It creates an alter ego or this thing that steps forward to go, I'm going to protect the inner child. I'm going to make sure that this child inside does not get hurt any longer. So I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to be that bad dude that can do the things that nobody else will want to do or can do. So that's what came out. That thing that protects you just said to your mom, I will fuck you up because I'm done being fucked up by you. That's all it was. It's a normal reaction, in my opinion. Sorry if that's crazy sounding, but
no, I think you're definitely there. There's a lot that goes into, like, if we break down, like, how can you operate in environments like that and then sleep at night and all these other things. And I've looked at it. I've looked at all of it to for me, the ability to compartmentalize is paramount, right? To be able to do that at any sort of, like, op tempo. But compartmentalization is just a tool to operate inside of that space. And you have to have a plan, or a mechanism needs to be, in place for you to unpackage the things that you've compartmentalized, or else it's just going to compound and compound and compound until how it manifests in your life, how it seeps out, because you can only hold in so much. And I was the perfect example of trying to hold all of that in, and I'm the only one I can trust. And, and that's where, like, it started. If I look at the Molly attack thing as it was one of many traumatic things I've been through, but or combat, pick up combat, put traumatic. It doesn't fucking, none of that shit matters. Trauma is trauma. It's yours. It's mine. Like anything less than nurturing can be perceived or conceived or received as traumatic. And that to me is like, holy shit, when I actually was able to realize that about how much I'm inflicting either directly or indirectly, like to the ones I care about most. Just because I will go back to like, oh, well, they don't know how bad it could be, you know? So like what I'm doing isn't that bad, you know? So like, oh, it's rationalization. It's minimizing your behaviors and normalizing certain behaviors. And I will say that you have to have some sort of the ability to unpackage. And we do that with another human being and God, a higher power. But if I look at my whole life, like I've yearned to believe in God and trust in God, but I was always so apprehensive to fully do it because I couldn't see it. And if I couldn't see it, I couldn't touch it. I damn sure wasn't going to believe it. So, and that goes back to control. Like I always had to be in control, and it took all the things, and I've endured all the things I've endured because God knew I could. And it was just for me to see that that is the reason I've endured the things I have. And now I'm doing that, keeping that at the forefront of, I don't want to put myself into those environments anymore because it was only going to end very, very poorly for me and for my family. So I've relinquished control, you know, surrendering truly and fully. And that started with my alcoholism. Like it was the one thing, it was the thing that I was like, all right, I'm not abstained from alcohol for different periods, but I was doing it for everybody else. And I was always going to end up like, it was going to creep its way back in. And just because I didn't have to wake up and drink or go to sleep and have to drink, and like, I couldn't rationalize in my mind. I'm like, oh, I'm not an alcoholic. Cause I know it. Like I watched my dad, like every night drink 24 fucking beers. And I'm like, well, I don't do that. So but I was a high functioning alcoholic. And I say all this because it's been almost a year and a half now of sobriety, but I'm like, that was just the beginning. When I truly accepted that I was powerless to something, that actually really opened the door to believing in something, truly believing in something greater than me. And that's been the missing link my whole life. And, you know, you couple that with like trying to really build my spiritual conditioning during my sobriety, and then with the psychedelic medicine stuff, where I actually went and you know, brought God into that experience with me and truly let go.
Let's talk about that. We're going to kind of bounce around. I want to talk about that. Let's first go into where you're at now, because when you and I met, you were fairly new into the transition period, which has been incredibly recent. I mean, super recent. And you have welcomed God into your life as of this year, very seriously, when you got baptized. But you have done some other things to try to work on yourself through alcohol and through trying to just become a better father, a more present husband, and things like that. But you utilize psychedelics to do so. And I want to talk about that because that has been the thing that I know for a fact is saving our community. I've seen it, I've touched it, I've felt it, I've been witness to it. And it is changing and saving veterans' lives unlike anything I have ever seen. Besides the government trying to help, which is just causing suicides to go through the roof with over medication. So tell me, you went through VETS program, which is friends of ours, Marcus and Amber Capone, Veterans Exploring Treatment, and they sent you somewhere to go work on yourself. How in depth would you like to go into that? Is there anything that we cannot touch on that?
No, we can definitely talk about it. So I think you touched on this as well, where the big thing for me, like since 2016, like if I were a dry bushel, like me holistically, that was the Raddison was the spark that lit that bushel onto fire. And that's when my life started to become unmanageable. I just wasn't ready to see it because I had so much pride and so much like, I got this. And but that was basically, so from 2016 till now, like I stayed operational through 2020, and but I did keep that door open for help, realizing that my life, it was becoming unmanageable, whether it was the talk therapy or they put me onto antidepressants, and but through those years, and I went to, I don't know, 3 or 4 different therapy intensive things over that period of time. I've gotten 3 saline gate blocks, the neck shots, where it's supposed to reset the asympathetic or sympathetic nervous system. And I kept that door open, whether the door was wide open for help or barely open. Shutting it looks like me taking my own life.
Correct.
So I kept it open, and I think what kept me from keeping it, or how I kept that door open, was because my goal was to be the best operator and team leader in the unit I was in, and beyond that. So it was almost like everything I was doing was to feed into that. So as long as I could stay operational, it was essentially just patching holes, and it was just patchwork, right? And then just to keep going. But everything in my life that I really cared about started to fall in my wake. And just to kind of set the conditions, it wasn't like I went from something going on, skip forward 5-7 years, and then I just did plant medicine. There was a ton of different things, and like I said, I've abstained from alcohol for 6-7 months twice during that period, up until I actually, finally gave in, a year and a half ago with my sobriety. But I view, like, my definition, I don't have a rock bottom, right? So for me, rock bottom means it's my inability to lower my standards faster than the actual circumstances. So there's like a temporary rock bottom. And I don't know if it's like digging a hole, jumping in, or the climb out, like, but that third one I hit was what I talked about on the show. And it was on the Sean show. And I finally saw myself for how I was acting, from outside of my body. And that was what opened up myself to, like, hey, let's try the AA out. Let's see if this is actually, because up to that point I was like, man, that's too fucking, it's too much. It's too this, too that. But then when I started going, I was like, holy shit. Like I said, the powerlessness, like, man, if I look at all the different principles, I'm like, there's some key ones on there that I'm like, man, that's me. But then if I was being honest with myself, I'm like, no, you can't have integrity in part of your life, and then in other parts of your life, like, use alcohol as a barrier to just do whatever the fuck you want. And that's just how I've lived my life. And I think the plant medicine piece, I was about a year sober when I did it. And I came back, that was early November. I came back from that. So of last year. And that was single-handedly like the most profound spiritual and healing process I've ever been through. And I think that had I had that opportunity earlier in all of it, I could have just skipped a lot of that bullshit. And the big thing was, though, I wasn't ready to receive a lot of the messages that I was being given, or blessings, and it wasn't my time. So it's like, but I do believe that because people ask me, like, well, when's the time for me? Like, when should I go and do this? And I'm like, man, you're the only one that can know that. But I'll just say that it it has the ability to take all of your pain, your trauma, your addiction, the darkness. It can take all of that away if you're intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter how much you've been through or how little you think you've been through. It doesn't really care, right? What it cares about is like your intentions with the medicine. And I think that was an amazing process where the ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT coupled together are like an amazing experience. That's awful. Like it sucks.
Yeah.
Like ibogaine sucks. Like it just sucks. I don't know how else to explain it. Like it's like really hard on your body, but it's because it's trying to, purge and detox all these things out of your system. And if you're intentional with it, like you can ask ibogaine certain questions. And I had all these pre-counseling questions that I was going to lay out. And then when it came to it, all I did, because they do a fire ceremony the night you start the ibogaine, and it's very ceremonial. Like you have an altar that you sit in front of, and eventually you lay down. But like you start outside with a fire ceremony, and you can either say or just burn your intent, like whatever your intentions are, or what you want to ask of the medicine, or have it take away. And I just asked it to take the darkness away. And it was like, because there's too many things where I was just like, man, there's too many. I don't know. Is it the chicken or the egg here? Like, I don't know. But I was like, fuck all of that, man. I just want to not live in the darkness anymore. And you take that first pill, and nothing hit me until probably the fourth pill. But like, and I still, because there's also an element of like my survival response or mechanism is so strong to protect myself from that little boy that was scared, and like that armor, those layers of just they're so like, and this will make more sense because I'm going to tell you like how my experience happened. After that, you take the first one, an hour later, you take the second, and then you're in the room, and you're hooked up with heart rate monitors, and like there's a medical staff there with you, and I'm like sitting there, right? They're playing this beauty music. Booty. It's from the tribal region of Africa, and it's just like, what the fuck is this? I can't really make sense of it, but so I'm just like shaking my little maraca thing, and
I can just picture.
Yeah, I'm just like, yeah. And I'm like, do something. I think
let's go.
Part of it, I'm like, let's go. And I think like when I laid back and I finally like let go a little bit, instead of trying to force something, I let go, and then I didn't ever hallucinate. Like it's very intuition based, but I will say that when I was able to relax and let go, that's when I started receiving some of the intuition stuff. And it was like, there was the first point where I noticed anything was like, because you wear an eye mask, and I heard someone purge, throwing up like next to me, and I heard all this commotion, and I was like, oh shit, they're coming for me. And I sat up really fast, and I like rip off my eye mask, and I was like, I like opened my eyes and like put my shit back down. I was like, nope. And I laid down, and then the room, I felt like the room started spinning, and I was like, okay, I'm going to purge now. And then I purged the first time. And I think that's when I laid back down, and I was like, man, are my eyes open or closed right now? And that's where I went to go like touch my eye. I was like, no, they're definitely closed. And because I've got the sleep mask in front of me, and I'm like, you can open your eyes. But I actually started to see my eyes open, but they were closed. I was like, what the fuck? So I just like stopped messing with that. And then it was like I was kind of going through space almost, where it was kind of like a dream where I'm just going through space and I'm like in a galaxy or whatever, and I see like translucent lights sporadically, but just dark as fuck. And darkness. I just went through the darkness, and there was only one figure I saw, like that whole time, and it was like a silhouette with translucent kind of lights around, but it was from a photo that I remember from my childhood, where my grandfather on my mother's side, which he passed away when I was going through Ranger School, and that's a whole nother story. But it was a photo of him, and he had a cowboy. The reason I know is because he had a cowboy hat on, a ponytail, and he was like, it was one of the only photos I remembered from my childhood. And like he's mouthing something. I could see him mouthing something, and I was really obsessed with trying to figure it out for what was probably felt like hours. What the fuck is he trying to say to me? And I never really figured it out, but I believe that this is where the intuition piece comes in, where I believe that he was there to show me that he's been watching out for me, and more, I think more importantly, to show me that there was another side to, my family, that was from a grandfather perspective, that now he was no perfect man at all, but I do believe that that's what I needed to see, there in that moment. And then the rest of it was,
he never hurt you.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So maybe that was his way of showing you that we're not all, like you said, he's not perfect, but there's ways to communicate afterwards.
Yeah. And that's where I think, that's what I believe it to be. And, so like that whole next day, so this, from 8 p.m. until, I was like one of the first ones to get up in the morning. I was like, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but I tried to like jump up, and I was like, ooh, and I was like, can I go to my room? Because I was just like, I'm done with this.
Right.
And they were like, yeah. So they had me roll over there. You're hooked up to the IV and stuff still. And I got over there, and they like kind of, because they went back to watch the rest of the group, and I was like, okay. And I like ran to the bathroom because I stood up too soon to shit, or not shit, to shit, to throw up. And it's like a one-way thing as far as the purging. But so they call that the gray day, that whole next day. And that was about the extent of the Ibogaine experience for me. And leading up to the 5-MeO is a shorter, they call that the bliss drug. And it's like from a toad or poisonous toad, the excretions or whatever. But, that's where you go back to doing it, or it's just you. And like for me, it was Trevor from Millar. He's actually Canadian. And
God, why does everybody group us all together? They're like, you're that Canadian with the hat with the bullets, and then, hey, I know this Canadian guy, so you guys must know each other or be friends.
Hey humans, I know you've all been seeing me drink HVMN's Ketone IQ lately. This is a game changer. Jet fuel in a bottle. I use Ketone IQ for everything in my life, whether it's running, cycling, podcasting, or just the extra boost that my brain needs. I won't lie, it helps push me to the next level in all things. I love Ketone IQ and what HVMN stands for. Go grab some shots today at hvmn.com and use the code BRASS20 and save.
Yeah, well, he's the one that he runs for vets. He does all the
I've never sat with vets. I've only ever gone with Heroic Hearts. So I don't know all of the individuals. I know Marcus and Amber really well. They're good friends, but in terms of going to sit in a ceremony, I've never sat with Ibogaine. I've never sat with 5-MeO. I've sat with ayahuasca and psilocybin. And those have been my two main focuses in working through what I needed to work through. So no, I apologize. I don't know that Canadian, but I will look him up after this though now.
No, so he did, so he's the psychedelic healer. He started his practice with this in Canada at opioid like clinics or whatever, where they were using Ibogaine like with people in withdrawals, and you can administer, it's like one of the only drugs you can administer with someone in an opioid withdrawal. And it like saving lives, you know. And then he linked up with Marcus and Amber, and then started running it for through vets, you know. And he's a phenomenal human being, man, because he sat through this experience with me. He did an interview with Sean Ryan as well.
Oh, okay.
Trevor. Yeah. So when Sean went and did this experience, he brought Trevor back onto the show. And so like when I sat down with him to do 5-MeO, like it's like a vape that you smoke or whatever. And he has you kind of sitting there and you're by yourself. Well, you're with him and a medical guy, and you inhale it or whatever, hold for 10, he counts or whatever. Then you hold it in, and then he starts to like lower you down to where you go back onto you're sitting, right? So he lowers you back onto a pillow. And when you get to 1, you know, he says, let go, and he lets go of you, and your head hits the pillow. And that's when it kind of like is just this immense, like whiteness. So like in contrast of darkness to light. And it's like the most beautiful light I've ever seen. And I started moving towards it. And then things and shapes got very abstract. And I was like, what in the fuck is this? And then I could tell that with just an abstract, like shapes, like it was very chaos, right? Inside of this, my body and my mind, like it like stopped the 5-MeO from doing anything else after that. I was just like one single cheer. I said this in my head, but as I'm saying it, or I think I said it out loud as well, a single tear kind of went down my cheek and hit my ear. And I was like, I'm too far gone. Like I'm too damaged. And I thought I just thought it. I thought I just said it out in my head, but then I think I said it out loud because Trevor was like, no, Kyle, I want you to do that again. So I did it again. And this time, I don't know what he did different or whatever, but this time when he let go, like lowering me back, it was like that let go was like, it started like getting louder and louder, let go, and just louder and louder. And then it just started to reverberate through my body, like this let go, like screaming at me. And this time I went towards that light. And to me, that was God. And I didn't have my mask on this time. I'm like looking over at Trevor, and behind him, I see this light. I see God behind Trevor, and it's beautiful. And I actually look over and I say, "Hey, is it okay?" And he looks at me. He actually, whether he said it or God said it, to me, it was. He said, it's okay. And right there, I just started like a waterfall of tears, started like just like I was in a waterfall, but they were legitimately just tears, just crying. And and he actually reaches over and then like hugs me. And like now I kind of sit up and I'm hugging him. And as I wrap my arms around him, my arms actually go through his body. And then I'm like, now I'm hugging myself. But to me, it was like that feeling of we are one, you know, as a human being. And then when I was hugging myself, like looking back on it, it's like I needed to give myself this hug. And then that hug became this weightlessness feeling of like I was being held like a baby, you know, and it was like all the weightlessness was now lifted and taken away in my body. Like I was being held by my Father and God. And right then, like, that's when that waterfall became, at first it was like, oh, this is like too much. And I was going to start to like buck this, but then I realized I could breathe. And it was legitimately just me crying. And then like convulsing crying after that when I laid back down. And then it turned into laughter like a child, like like ugly crying into like crying like a baby or laughing like a small child. And it was like the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life. And
your inner child was being held and protected for the first time, and you actually were able to hold yourself.
Yeah. And then like for me, the like bringing God into it with me, like I truly felt like everything he's been trying to show me for so long is for a reason, and I'm just not ignoring it anymore.
Well, you didn't, when you do a psychedelic experience like that, like you're not bringing God into it. God is into it. That's part of it. A lot of people that I talk to, I'm what is like described as a recovering Catholic. I was the one who was born and baptized, put in Catholic school, went to church at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on if Nana wanted to go. I did the communion. I did the confirmation where you wear the white dress as a child, which makes no goddamn sense to me. That's just weird. I have an issue with putting small children in like wedding dresses and then walking them towards like a priest. It's just not a vibe I'm down for. And so I did this up until grade 11 of my life, right? Where went to the school, did the thing. Instead of having like an extra English class or a math class, you had a religion class where you studied the Bible, you broke it down, you wrote about it, you did all these things. And for me, at no point in my entire existence did I ever feel a connection to that, ever. There was when I hear people now as adults talk about God, I have these two really amazing individuals in my life, called Neil and Ruve McDonough, and they are God country family. That's the way it works, right? And when I hear people like that talk about God, and when I hear them talk about the love they have for God and like how it's like another person in their family. I never had that. So when individuals talk about God, they talk about it in the same sense of this person being in their lives. I never understood it until the moment I went and sat with ayahuasca. When you go and have a psychedelic experience, you're opening yourself up to something way bigger, more powerful than yourself. And that is God. And the medicine is what provides that connection and that tool. And that moment where you talk about sitting and being held or being hugged and having that moment, and you were like, I'm sitting with my father. I know what that feels like. I don't perceive it the same way and use that word God, because to me, that has always been this word that's been attached to some really not lovely things. So for me, I just say the universe, because whether that's trauma related and I'm not ready to accept that word, or whether that's just how my body brain receives the medicine, it is the same thing. It is the light, the greater connector, the thing that holds us all together, the thing that says we are one. And it can show up in all different ways. And that's why it's like you don't necessarily need to invite God in a psychedelic experience. God is there. Period.
Yeah, I think if with people that like maybe struggle with organized religion or even that are agnostic, it's they still believing in something greater than yourself is, I think, the most important part to ever really healing and not just healing, but ever getting yourself outside of yourself and really like building a sense of self from God or from something greater than you and within, and then being selfless, and from an altruistic mindset. And for me, it's I don't care like who your God is or what. Could be the woods, it could be the universe. It doesn't matter to me. I do know that there's a common thread between all of them, is just believing in something bigger than you. And that's where I won't ever cast judgment on anyone, because for one, who am I to judge others? Like, period. That's not for me to do. And I do know that's been the biggest piece for me, is I've yearned for something that I could trust that was bigger than me. But it can't be an institution. It can't be a job. It needs to be, and that's where I go back to the impact that you can make in our youth's lives is can be so profound without even realizing, where the impact that you could have is, because what our youth need more than anything is positive role models in their lives, and that doesn't necessarily have to be biological parents, so that's I don't know. I just think that's it's paramount to ever really being a contributing member of society is believing in, something greater than you.
When you can believe
a functioning like adult human.
Productive part of society is what our government calls it when they're talking about reintegration of military. We need you to be
about being like grounded in humanity. Like,
right.
I wasn't for a very long time. I was so desensitized to life and death, and that only fed into all the other things that I had rationalized or been normalized behaviors from childhood, and it was only going to end very, very badly for me and for what I care about if I continued to stay in those environments. I was never going to heal staying in those environments I was working in. And I damn sure wasn't. No one was forcing me to do it. Like, right. I was, and I'm taking ownership and agency and having, agency in my life, and what I'm going to do with it, is the big piece of it. And I think, like, to quote scripture, because this really, because for a long time, I hung on to like, he or that sin cast the first stone, because I didn't know how to forgive myself, for any of my actions. But I really tried to anchor myself into that. But I think now that I have surrendered, like the biggest verse that really resonates with me is in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 13:11, where it's like, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. So for me, I have become a man, and I have to let go of all those childish ways of thinking and acting. And they're going to still present themselves. Like, because it's not, this is like, you don't just, boom, I'm fixed. That's not how any of this works. But like having little anchors, messages, and meditation and journaling. I know that's a thing you talked about, and like having those things to anchor you and center you are huge, because we are creatures of habit, and without a mirror, and you can't walk around with a mirror in front of you all the time, or else you wouldn't be able to see where you're going. But you do need to have mirrors, metaphorically, and in your own self, right? These little like systems checks internally, and then listening to others, the ones that you want in your life. And as hard as that is, and this is something I'm struggling with right now, like listening to them, because it's really easy for me to be like, well, you don't see all the work I'm doing. Well, you're just focusing on like the surface level. And I'm like, but if that's how I'm showing up to them, for them, then I have to pay attention to it and do something about it, because that they are the mirrors that I want in my life. And that's where it's about negativity, and like, I'm not taking input from all these other people in my life anymore. Like external to like very few people, Right.
And psychedelics, that's one thing I want to just like touch on. You spoke about, you kind of said it right before you got into the conversation about psychedelics and going, you have integration counseling prior to this. It's mandatory when you're working with vets and heroic hearts that you do integration counseling prior, so that you understand what you're walking into, so that you have your intentions set. The thing that psychedelics do that most things and most don't say medications, treatments, or when you're working on yourself does, is psychedelics hold up that mirror. Whether you want to see it or not, you're going to see it. That's why it's so imperative, so important that when you're going into a psychedelic treatment of some type, number one, you know where you're going. Number two, you've set yourself up properly so that you understand when you walk into this situation, you know what you're asking for. You have to be clear about your intention and your message. And then afterwards, doing your integration counseling. It is so, so, so important. I cannot stress it enough. When you see the things you see, experience what you experience, and sit in the presence of something as powerful as God, you have to be able to then integrate that into your life so that your mind does not crack. Because at the end of the day, we all think that we're ready to handle the stuff that's going to be presented to us. But we do not understand what's going to be presented and the way it's going to be done, and then how that's going to affect us and make us react or act when we come out of it. So it's so important to lean on the integration tools that are given to you, because the things that you're doing are not a quick fix pill. They are not going to make everything go away. You're not going to walk away from it and go, everything's perfect now. It requires a significant amount of work, listening, and education. And that comes back to what you're just saying. If I'm acting a certain way, but those aren't perceiving it the way that I think I am acting, and they're saying, no, this is how you're coming off. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to learn from it and really sit down with yourself, do things like journaling and grounding yourself and pull yourself back down. Because once you've done psychedelics, it puts you up and you float in a different spot, a different reality, a different realm, a different vibration, whatever you want to call it. It does something to you psychologically, emotionally, physically. It changes something. The way you perceive this world that we are sitting in, it changes you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you reach a level of consciousness that you could never do unassisted. But one of the things that, like, I know the reintegration or the integration of post medicine is a big thing that I haven't been doing as much as I should. Now I do believe that my integration has been very much like investing into, my faith in God, because that's how I want to live my life.
Right.
Building, the new disciplines of in life, and every day. But there's the resources that are there, they're there for a reason. And they're paramount, because there is that first month where I just came back and I was like, oh my God. The way they explained it to me was, if like your mind is this like fish bowl or whatever, and Ibogaine just pours in like a gallon of water into this thing, it's like sloshing around until it levels out. And then that becomes kind of like a newer baseline. But for the first month, it's definitely I don't know. I cried more in that first month than I've ever, but it wasn't just like random outbursts. It was like anything to do with humanity would like trigger. I would get triggered to then get emotional. And it really, like, it's beautiful in that sense. And, but I do know that a couple months removed, I'm like, I have to stay working on, on the integration piece of all of it, because there isn't just a magic pill. Like you said, it's not just gonna, come in and fix you if you don't do the work. You gotta, for one, you have to be you have to be open to the work. And then it'll show you could show you a way, or a new light. And then continuing to, one thing that was huge coming out of that was, I just like started over. I was like, you know what? Fuck all this. Like, I just started over with all the negativity that could potentially manifest itself, and was post like Sean's interview. And I was just like, I'm getting a new phone number, a new iCloud account, everything just started right the fuck on over. So, and the people that are in my life that I want in my life, and that I didn't save their numbers and contacts, like, we will reconnect when it's time. But I started over, and that really helped me feel like, because there's so many networking things, and I'm like, oh man, I'm missing out. But I was like, fuck all that. Like, I'm just going to start over. And because it would, regardless, it would always, there'd always be an element of it, something manifesting, it's like creeping its way in. If I didn't do that from just a network, like starting over, like bringing everything right to center, and then started to build out and trying to be like very slow and methodical about what I let back into my life,
What is it that you have found besides God that psychedelics have done for you that you don't believe that you could have done on your own?
I think the like my sobriety piece, like, so like I don't have the urges to, not that I had an urge to drink, because the mental obsession was gone, the physical dependence was gone, but I haven't had to take any of the pharmaceutical medication stuff, so like that's huge. So I think that's another massive benefit to it. Like, I don't have to take any antidepressants or sleep meds, and it's like, or anxiety meds, and that's fucking huge, so
Massive.
From the trauma and the addiction, because whether we can realize it or not, like, all of those pharmaceuticals, whether you're prescribed them or not, have levels of dependency to them.
100%.
It's you're like detoxing from that. Just the antidepressants was like fucking short circuiting in my brain for a long time. And then they get like social anxiety and all these other things starting to come up. And I'm like, man, what the fuck is going on? And, yeah, I think that's something that the plant medicine can take from you, and just takes another thing off your plate. So you can really focus on building some new disciplines in your life moving forward.
Did you notice any sort of physical pain relief happen with psychedelics?
As I'm sitting here, I'm like, my lower back. No, no physical pain relief.
No? Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think I have too many pain problems, but I'm actually going to stand up.
Live your life, homie. Live your life. Okay, let's change gears a little. I want to talk to you a little bit about, you've had this conversation again on our friend's show, and I know Sean has really, he did a great job of diving into the technicality of your profession and things like that. Coming from a traditional fighting force, I will not pry on the technicalities of your profession, but I do want to touch base, because we've alluded to it a few times during this conversation. And very often when people ask me, what was that trauma point? What was that light switch moment? What was that thing that happened where everything changed for you, where you were no longer an operator and you became, I don't want to say this darkness, but you were able to move through life differently. And that seems to be, and what you've alluded to, that seems to be the Raddison Blu Hotel in Mali. Can we talk about this? How did that operation come to fruition? Was the plan always to go to Mali? What does that look like?
Yeah.
All right. Mali, let's go.
It's a country in Africa.
Is it? Did you know Canadians deploy there? Do you know that we actually go there?
Yeah.
I didn't until recently.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't have known unless I went. So I think like that trip was as part of a deployment cycle, and I wasn't supposed to be going to that outstation up until like a month or so out, where whoever was supposed to go there basically said that they didn't feel comfortable in a suit and tie every day, briefing an ambassador and in that environment. So they asked me, and I was of course like, man, motherfucker. And because I mean, they even said, they were like, hey man, I know you're going to get fucking pissed off, but we need you to do this. And that's really like, I bring that up because it truly is a part of like what's helped me kind of heal through all of that, was the fact that it was me there,
Mm-hmm.
and God had a plan to
Mm-hmm.
put me there. So right place, right time, right person. And that ain't taken away from anyone else, but what they would have done, I don't know. I know what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long, long time, I was like, nah, that was just a Tuesday. Roger that, you know. And the fact of it is like, you know, people are going to have children that are going to have children that are going to have children because of my direct response to that attack. And that is something that I know God put me on this earth to do, of many things. And the reason that one has like impacted me for such a long time, I believe, is I was seeing, you know, the attack itself. Like, I was seeing people in Western dress, you know, executed or murdered, and I was desensitized to a certain like demographic or culture in whether it be Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And like with a kinetic mission, you know, I've been deployed elsewhere, but you know, as far as the kinetic aspects of it, and then the other part was the preparation piece, right? So like preparing my mind, body, or spirit, and not and or and for violence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't get a chance to do any of that. And I look back at the way that we prepare for every mission we go on, as even if it's like a no notice, just boom, like we still do a plan. And you know, it's pretty extensive, and that is its own process of like protecting, you know, and you're spreading out the risk amongst capable other service members, and then, you know, so that's a big piece for me, like looking back at why that's impacted me in my own professional and personal life beyond that and, you know, the attack itself. It was very much like, I mean, it was chaos. It was chaos, the definition of chaos. And like, we go down and take things on as teams and troops and larger units going into these very, very chaotic environments. And it's like this controlled chaos environment. And you don't have to absorb all of the input. You know, you're just really focusing on what you're, you know, safeguarding your own bandwidth, and then buying down all the risk with collective experience, you know, working together. And for me, like, I felt like I was the most exposed physically and mentally and spiritually I've ever been in a kinetic environment like that. So everything I'm receiving was like sensory overload, because it was like going into the hotel from the time I got a phone call at 7:10 in the morning.
Okay, back up. God, I love talking to you because I can just let you go, but also we need to give some context here.
Yeah.
So if you haven't listened to Sean Ryan's show with Kyle, please go listen to it. It's a great interview in terms of his depths of this conversation. But to give a little context for those that are listening and haven't listened to it, you were deployed to Mali, and like you said, you were wearing a suit, you were going to be advising, you're going to be having these conversations and briefings. Then you get a phone call that you didn't expect, a phone call that kind of came out of nowhere. And what happened?
Yeah. So the phone call itself, like, it went something like, "Hey, Kyle, there's an attack ongoing at the Raddison." I had been in country for 3 weeks at this point, so I barely knew which way was up.
Yeah, really.
And, you know, I'm in my own like safe house, like embassy housing or whatever. I lived in this like 4 or 5 bedroom like townhouse mansion thing by myself, because we were trying to build build out capacity there, but the political environment just wouldn't, boots on the ground, whatever, even if it's just partner force, development, like, and we were full on, I say we, the former me, like we were so focused on ISIS at that point and dismantling the caliphate because no one else was tasked with doing it, and so I was legitimately there to try to divest of that position to give it to our counterparts in the SEAL teams. And it wasn't much of a mission, so like from a mindset perspective, like ignorance is bliss, man. Like everybody there was just like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. Oh my, what are we going to do with our children? I'm like, why the fuck are your children here? First of all, like they have someone like me here, and that's not me fucking saying anything like bragging. I'm just like, hey man, there's not very many of us, and this is a fucking shithole for a safe haven for terrorism. And like Al Qaeda's been rebuilding there forever in the Trans-Sahel and ISIS and fucking fill in the blank. So if you look at like why they chose that specific place, well, to me, it's pretty easy. You could throw a rock from across the street, and with a good throw, you could hit the fucking front door of this hotel, regardless if they had security or not. Like there wasn't much standoff. It was a soft target that was dense, like filled with Western people, but mainly the people that stayed or that were there temporary duty, like going to their embassies every morning to work, temporary duty capacity. They'd stay in these types of hotels, and this was a big one. And that's actually the phone call I got was, hey, there's been an attack at this hotel. It's ongoing. There's shooting, explosions. It looks like 5 to 8 armed gunmen like launched the attack from what looked like an embassy like vehicle, like, so that to me was the first bit of information I got. And I was like, well, fuck. And I could, as soon as I went outside, like I had grabbed my kit because it was in my ready kit bag. And because they also called me to see if I could get a hold of the deputy chief, which was my next door neighbor. And because they couldn't get a hold of him. So I went over there, made a phone call for some other cats to meet me in front of my house. But I went over there and was like, hey, has there been there's an attack going. And he was on the phone with whoever in the hotel. And I was like, all right, well, let me get their number. And he looked at me and said, why? Like, why would you want their number and room numbers and information? And I was like, because I'm going to go get them. And,
right.
And he was like, oh, you do that? And I was like, yeah, yes. And
do it well too.
And well, it remains to be unseen, but just figuring shit out on the fly. And I tried to do, basically having start points to be able to, I'm not just running in there all willy nilly, so going, linking up with the MARSOC dudes that were working at the embassy, and then the regional security officer, the State Department law enforcement, because they knew the floor plans of the hotel, and they were like a direct conduit back to the ambassador. That was, so I formed like a little motley crew, and then I just started fucking patrolling, man, principles of patrolling, and just started trying to absorb as much information as I could. It was only about 600 yards from there, straight line to the hotel from my house. So it didn't take very long to get over there, and then kind of did like a, walk up to dismount and then walk up to kind of absorb as much of it from the last cover and concealment as I could. And by that point, we had got a phone call with one of the Americans was trapped in a room on fire. And that was kind of the launching point for me to say, well, hey, do you know where this room is? The RSO did, the State Department cats. And that's what I basically had to convince the ambassador that I'm just going to go get him and come back. And then we kept that there's a ton of lessons throughout that whole day, but like the imminent threat to life, like I went right to that, and then pulled him out. And then that's when I started getting more room numbers from Americans that they knew were there, but were unaccounted for, they couldn't get a hold of. And that list just kept growing through the day. So it was very specific for me initially to where I was going direct to locations. But, I after I pulled that guy out of the room on fire, I went back in to go to the highest floor of rooms that I had information on. And in doing so, there was no outside fire escapes because I was wanting to work my way from the top down, because obviously they already have the upper hand. They're running around this place unadulterated, just no one's, they haven't met any resistance yet. So but if you can imagine, like, going into this atrium was like this embassy suites, like kind of atrium where it's 3-sided and multiple stories, and it's just super exposed. And it was all, all the fire alarms and just dark and scary. It just was it. And I could have never used that word before. Scary. What the fuck does that mean? But looking back on it, man, it was, I joke around and say it was tight butthole the whole time.
Yeah.
But that's fear, right? And it's okay for me to say that and to feel that and put word to it, and, but it didn't stop me from taking action. But it was overwhelming because every room I went, regardless of how I'm trying to like prompt other guys to like, no, I was like the one man and the breacher and everything. And there was no moments of reprieve that I was just so used to. As much as I wanted to always be the one man, I could never always be the one man working with the teams that I'm used to working with. And, that's a big part about how, like, it just really took every ounce of my physical mind and like body and then spirit to handle and deal with what I was being presented. But when I went back in, I basically was like, all right, here's the room numbers for the highest floor. They're 7, 26, 22, and 24. I went to the lower floor where I'd already cleared to, and was like, all right, here's where it should be. This is the most direct stairwell all the way up there. So I'm not having to run and then double back and all this other shit. So just trying to be more efficient with my movements. But in doing so, when I went up that stairwell, I had no way to basically breach that fire rated door from the inside. I didn't have any tools. So I went down a few floors and then down another wing to try to hit this other stairwell. And when I did that is when I ran into the actual attackers in that same similar type fire rated stairwell. And I talked about that at length, I think, on Sean's show about that encounter. And that was a very, very intense few encounters right there. And from the gun, like exchanging gunfire from 4 or 5 feet away in this concrete stairwell where I'm just like, I thought for sure that I was dead after that first shot, because I'm looking down this guy's muzzle now. But I did see his demeanor change in his eyes, because he saw this big American with fucking panos on and running up the stairwell. But I'm here in the clearance and he's there and he's got me dead to rights. But that's where I thought for sure I was dead, like right then. But I didn't die, and I kept fighting. But I'm kind of stumbling back, and I like ran back up the stairs and like I'm cussing these dudes out, and that's when they threw 2 grenades on top of me as well. But and I just ate all of that, like, because I was able to jump down the stairs and get to like relative cover. I thought for sure when I did go back outside after after a little bit after I locked those guys into that spot, because they had no way to go any higher. It was like this separate wing that they built and added on. That it was just all sorts of confusing. But they actually were looking for a certain bank of rooms in the hotel that the Air France crew stayed at.
Why?
So, because they were targeting France. They were targeting Westerners. They knew that that's why they launched the attack from, it wasn't embassy driver vehicles. They actually started across the street sitting on suitcases full of all their shit. And then just across the street, just opened the suitcases and like got geared up and chased everybody in, because the embassy drivers for all the embassies or whatever show up at the same time to pick them up after breakfast. And they just followed them in. And a majority of the people they killed were the ones that were in the breakfast area. And
I'm sorry, I need to stop for a second. How in God's green earth are we dumb enough to have government officials be leaving and entering a soft target at the same time every day with the same vehicles and not think something is going to happen?
well, that's where it goes back to the ignorance is bliss.
Jesus.
Until it isn't. And yeah, I mean, that's the only kind of response. It doesn't make it okay, but I will say that, like in a so they chased everybody initially through into the breakfast room area, and that's where they ended up setting that whole room on fire. But then a majority of the people they killed, I'd say at least 14 people, like following the man in front of you or whatever, but someone had the idea to go into a service elevator area off of the kitchen where the banquet room connected, the breakfast room. And if they would have just went, instead of going left into that, if they'd have just went a little right, and then there's a hallway that's freedom's on the end of that hallway there, they chose to go to an elevator
and corral themselves.
And like there was really only one way to go, like up on that elevator. So that's where they end up like executing a lot of them right there, like point blank range to their head. And that's actually where the American was killed, the American citizen that was there, Anita Tatar. And so I think there's a ton of lessons that came out of all of that, but any active threat that happens, like there is windows where you can get the fuck out. And if you are within one of those windows, or if you're being pursued by that, like don't go to a fucking elevator, like go to stairwells, to exit signs, and follow and understand like the emergency exit plans. And if you're going to be in environments, like it's all like a mindset where it's not like hypervigilance, it's just being more prepared versus paranoid. And that's where I'm trying my best to train the mindset piece of everything with my company, Blue Bearing Solutions, and just doing what I can, in that regard. Here stateside.
Right. Yeah. Here in the country, because people are blind to their situational awareness. They do not, for the life of for whatever reason, I've said this before and I'll say it again, Western North America, we've been tested once with 9/11. We all seen the response to that. We're not tested. We're not a tested country. North America is not a tested set of places where people are kicking their doors in on a regular basis and having to be cautious and aware of everything around them. They're just not. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being smart. It's about understanding the exits, the entry points, and the soft targets. It's not, and people will say to me, well, I'm not military. Why would I know any of that? Why would I care to know any of that? When I go to Mexico, why do I care where I go? The cartel's not going to bother me. When I go to Africa, why do I care? You should goddamn well care, because there are people on this face of this earth, just because terrorism, I'm doing quotes, is over. Again, quotes. It's not over. It's just in a rebuild phase. It's happening in Africa all over Africa. It's happening in Afghanistan. Now that the Chinese are in, it's just getting highly funded. All of these things are still happening. Just because governments say that terrorism is over and that the threat is not there, that doesn't mean it's not happening. And if you're a Western person and you're traveling in any of these vulnerable countries and you're staying in any of these locations that are soft targets that can see you moving in and out whenever they want, you damn well better have an exit strategy. Just something, anything.
Yeah. And that's the piece we could go on like rabbit holes with. I think the biggest thing though is like taking ownership in your life and the fact that the environments that we live in now, even in our society here in North America, and you are the only person you're going to be your savior. Or you can just be a liability. And, it's not, there's a massive difference between paranoia and just being more prepared. I don't train people that are paranoid. I just don't, because I get to pick and choose who I train. But the big thing is like, there's been so many different of these active shooter, active threat things, and people want an answer. They want an answer. They want a tool. They want a technique. They want this. And I'm like, it starts fucking here and individually. And the one thing that I look at all these active shooters that we've had since Columbine in our country, and it's, these motherfuckers aren't trained. So thank God, because if they were an organized terrorist group, we'd be fucked as a society. But they're not. And the fact is like, it only takes one person to change the trajectory of any of these attacks. And whether you want to pick up and bear arms, that's up to you. But if you're going to do that, I train like people to build their confidence with those tools. But to ask themselves a question of why they are carrying a firearm. And if they can't answer it, then I'm like, well, it looks like you and I have reached a point where we're not going to train together anymore. Because and I'm not saying, and that's when it's firearms related training, but if it's just like, if I'm speaking with a school administration, I don't expect all of them to want or to introduce. There could be no firearms involved. I still go and talk to school administrations and to other communities, type things, because everyone can be like a force multiplier and and have these, like, you have to have these types of talks, because you can't just pick up a template and say, here's the answer, or this will work for you and that'll work for everybody. It's very much understanding the environments that you're operating in every day, and just tightening up little aspects of that. But you can only do that. There is no training program for active threat response. Like, there is a mindset and exposure that you can create, whether it's talking through, walking through, or scenario based, like full blown, like fully developed auditory, visually, and like tactile, like all these senses of creating the most realistic environments based on real world experiences that they've happened, and you expose yourself to those, because the next time that you do see something that's similar, it's for one, it's two things. You're going to be more prepared to have learned what you can actually safeguard in those. You're going to be in fight, flight, or freeze when this happens. Which one you do is up to you. I don't know, but you can operate in that environment if you know, like, what to safeguard as far as bandwidth, like how to separate what's noise and what's most important in those, because critical decision making isn't something you can do very well in fight, flight, or freeze. But exposure to those environments can help lessen how stimulating any one environment's going to be. They're never going to look the exact same,
right?
But there's elements to it that I do with my training that will help you, and they can be full-blown scenarios, like I said, where we have, like, it's full-blown, like as realistic as I can create. And then there's just like, hey, let's walk through and talk through your current policies or SOPs or because a policy is only as good as it's communicated and understood across any one entity or thing. So a lot of it is like, we have a policy for that. We have this, we have that. I'm like, okay, well, fucking give me that. And then I'm like, talk me through this part. If this happens, then these decision matrices and shit. And I'm like, okay, you stop. Now you pick up where they left off. And if it's not common vernacular or common knowledge across a spectrum of people that it could impact, then it's just a policy on a wall, and it's good it's about as good as fucking nothing. So that's where I come in and challenge, whether it's law enforcement or school administrations, because I am very much focused on, I don't want to see another child taken from us if there's something I can do to help with that.
What are you kind of changing gears into Blue Bearing a bit? When you're talking about these situations that you go into with administrations or law enforcement, and you're having these hard conversations about the realities of school situations and active shooter drills. I mean, you guys, and I say you guys in America, you guys just had a shooting in California this week where over 10 individuals were shot and killed, and a man just jumped on the shooter because something just came over me, he said. But can you imagine if we had even 10% of our population trained for these situations? And the argument very often, at least in Canada, is, well, if we have no guns, this stuff doesn't happen. Well, that's not true, right? Because in Canada, a couple months ago, we had 2 individuals go province to province with a knife, killing over 15 individuals at close range, obviously with a knife, which is a horrific way to go. My point is, you do not need a gun. A real gun. You could use an airsoft gun. You could use a knife. You could use a bomb. It does not matter. If somebody wants to inflict damage, they will find a way to inflict damage. Canada's argument is, take the guns, this stuff doesn't happen, which we know is not true, because the majority of guns that have been taken off the streets in Canada as of recently have all been black market guns, and they have not been with a single registered gun owner. They have been people who are bad people who go, well, you take the guns legally, I'll get them another way. It's the same with the cartel and the drugs, right? You take the good, we're going to give the bad, it's going to happen. So in saying that, when you are looking at situations where maybe people don't carry guns, can't carry guns, aren't legally allowed to own guns, even though it's our goddamn right, why and what do you say to these people? Because frankly, I've gone into schools in the local area, and I've had these conversations with schools that are literally built out of glass. Everything is glass, glass. So everything can be seen. What do you say to these people? How are they supposed to protect these kids?
Yeah. Well, it's not just Canada. It's here. It's all over here too. But
you walk into Texas. You walk into Texas. You kick over a plant, you're going to find 2 guns. There's certain states that are heavily armed, and then there's certain states that are not. But the fact of the matter is, at least you can be.
I think there's too many guns in this country.
Do you?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's I also think there's too many law enforcement.
Oh, okay. I want to pull that apart.
Yeah. So, and because it boils down to like, that's a problem that I can't deal with. Right? I can't not deal with, I can't do something about that. All I can do is train people to be confident, gun owning and carrying citizens, right? And law enforcement to account for every single shot they take, understanding what's in front of, at, and beyond your target. And a lot of whether it's the people, right? Going back to the why are they doing this? Why are they picking up a gun and as a law abiding citizen? Or like, is it for show? Is it for like asking yourself what it truly means to protect others, yourself and others? It means to take the life of another human being. Like, you're not in this to de-escalate. Like, that's not your job. Now, law enforcement, I'd say about 80% of them in this country need to be bagging groceries because they're the wrong motherfuckers. And they're doing it for, there's two, and I'll just say this broadly, but they're doing it for a paycheck or for a pension or stability, or they're doing it because they got beat up as a fucking kid. And they want to like to project power, right, onto people. So those are both equally as fucking bad. But you can see where that it just gets extremely, that everybody wants to throw, we need more of this, we need more of that. You need the right people and the right tools, like, and techniques, but it starts with the right people and the right type of training. And they're too, based on retention, because they have to meet all these numbers when they're going through academy. They're not going to talk to them about all the brutal honesties and realities of like what it means to protect and serve. Like truly, like let's show them some like real footage of like some situations where fresh out of academy, like where you think you've made it, you're credentialed now, and you're just, now that's your opportunity to learn how to do your fucking job. Like, because your job, and I won't ever say that I'm going to teach law enforcement how to do their job, because I never was. I don't ever market myself as like someone, I'll teach you how to be this guy, that guy, and the other. Nope. I will increase your survivability and your lethality. God forbid you have to use lethal force, but you will fucking account for every shot you take, and you will understand like the impacts that it has on you to intimately take another human being's life, because that shit you'll live with for the rest of your life.
Nobody talks about that.
Yeah, I do. I do all the time, because this isn't a game, and people need to get hit with that, because it's something that it is truly the definition of like, it can make or break you as a human being, beyond just understanding like the environments that you're going to be. I don't envy any law enforcement. Like, I don't want that job. But I want to help. And that's the big piece, is like, I'm going to train my Harnett County, my sheriff's office tomorrow, or they're coming to me to train at the new shoot house. And I'm going to start doing that twice a month for them. And I'm volunteering that time. And
good for you.
For my community. Same with my daughter's schools here. And I wish I could do that across the country, but it has, and I will, but I have to monetize, aspects of this business to be able to sustain itself. And I am working with a bunch of different LE agencies, state or national, state and local, and school administrations. So that where was I going with that?
The training in itself.
I said the 80% piece of like law enforcement across the country. 20% of those are the right people. 10% of the 20 are the actual warriors, and 10% are the ones that are like will step up as soon as the warriors like show them with their actions like what right looks like in impossible situations, right, where you can't. And that's where there is so much experience in the borders of this country, but for whatever reason, knowledge through and understanding, I don't understand penal code, and that's why I wouldn't tell someone, I'm going to teach you how to do your job. You have to just take elements of the training that I offer and apply that into your life and your profession. But the big piece of that is it's the right person, right? And then once you have the right people or few, like if I'm speaking to a group of 50, if I can speak to and truly connect with 10 of them, I have succeeded in what I'm trying to do, because they're going to take that and that's going to ripple and manifest and permeate into their environments. And it's just like when we talk about change, it's like incremental shift, right? And that's how change happens. And then societally, we need a change, period. But that takes a long time for it to actually happen. But that doesn't mean that we can't do something with the next 40 years that we have on this earth, hopefully. And that's what I'm doing with any of the training. And it doesn't have to be firearms. It can be like, that's why the active threat response course I do is called Protector Mindset. It's not an active threat. Like you'll fix, this will fix all your active threat problems. Nope. It's a mindset.
Nope.
And it's understanding what being a protector is and what a protector and what a provider is. Like a lot of people think they're protectors, but they're actually just providers. And yeah, so that's kind of like my way of, and I'm very much focused on law enforcement. Because I want to build I want to build a syndicate of people and companies to leave our society better than we found it. And so that is the primary mission at Blue Bearing.
Well, the primary mission is a selfless one, if I've ever seen one, because you could really run and take and do whatever you've had in your past, and you could run with that and write 1 million books, and you could do X, Y, and Z. But instead, you're choosing to take this time, the lessons learned, and apply it to civilian life in a way that helps you transition out, but shows others that you can transition. Are you drinking soda on my goddamn podcast?
It's a bubbly water.
Is it? Oh, so Michael Bublé.
It's a bubbly water. Yeah.
Okay, good. I was going to give you
Sparkling
so
water.
much shit. We've had the conversation about sugar.
No, I know. Nope. There's just water on this table.
All right. I will accept it. Moving on. The thing that I love, though, about your mindset is it is so drastically different than so many people who have just transitioned out. That could be your willingness to be accountable for your actions and what that looks like in a family setting and a civilian setting. That could be your willingness to go and work on yourself with vets, or that could just be your demeanor from always wanting to just be better since you've been young. Either way, all of those things encompass a person that is looking like on the outside a successful transition out. That to me is an example that needs to be showed on a large scale, because transitioning out of the service is one of the most difficult things to do if you are not prepared or you don't know what you're falling into. And it could end up in a very difficult time for you and your family and everyone around you. So I love seeing that. And I love seeing your willingness to say, hey, look, I cried. I've had to sit in these moments. I've had to understand that things are scary. That's a real word I've adopted into my vocabulary. And it's acceptable and okay for a grown-ass man to say, I was scared in a situation, because those are feelings and emotions that no one wants to talk about. Nobody wants to acknowledge because of the ego that is within ourselves. We don't need to kill the ego. We need to tell that bitch to take a seat and then come forward and acknowledge that we're going through things, we're feeling things, and vocalize those things, if only to not only hear yourself say it and acknowledge it, but to help others down that path. And with Blue Bearing, you're doing that from a profession and a work standpoint and utilizing that and volunteering that. But moving forward in your life, you've utilized TBI treatments, you're off of pharmaceutical meds, you've used psychedelics, you're going to start using your integration properly, because I'm going to be on you about it. But you have also really built a better relationship with your family unit. And before you go, I want to touch on that and your wife, because you cannot do this job successfully without a real, true partner beside you. And I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about her, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think there's two things I wanted to cover. So like the like trauma and mental health, like period, I think is, and I use this in a tactical kind of metaphor of like, if you and I go into a room, I go left, you go right, and some gnarly shit happens in that room, and we return to base, and then like you tell me, you're like, hey, Kyle, I don't know how I feel about something in that room. It could be a tactical thing. It could just be that statement, right? I'm not sure how I feel about that. And I tell you, well, that was a Tuesday. Like, get your shit back, or, redo your shit and like get ready to go back out. Like, I've missed an opportunity as a leader, as a peer, as a human, more importantly, to maybe not, you don't need an intervention every fucking time something comes up, but that's a data point where I could be like, And the big takeaway I've learned with any of this is it's about perspective. And I use the room as a way to break this down, because I can't, from that person's point of view, I can't be where his feet are, his shoes. And maybe he saw something, but if you peel back perspective to his perspective, how well they slept the night before, how much they prepared their mind, body, and spirit, and then their journey in life up to that moment in time. Like, all I can do is just say, all right, that's a data point where they've now said something. And if I were to say, it's a Tuesday, get your shit back on, I have shut that person down potentially from ever wanting to say something again, because it's not like institutionally or culturally accepted to bring it up. And it doesn't have to, on a surface, it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, I'm fucking losing my mind. And more than likely it won't. They'll just lose their fucking minds. And it'll probably be away from work, because we do a really good job of like ripping apart the tactical lessons learned and what you did wrong. But those are all in the process of all of those. If you can just take your head out of your sights or your optic and throw your vision out there about what's happening around you, because if these are the people that you're going on to targets with, or training with, or living with, they're worth you investing that energy into. And you could pick this up and place it onto any model, personal life, home life, work life. It doesn't matter. It is about perspective. And if that if they're worth you investing in, then that's an opportunity that I feel like we've done a very poor job in the military, especially, of seeing those opportunities for what they were. And that's where I think, like, you cannot process any of this alone. Like, you have to share it with another human being and with your higher power. And I will say that behind any one of us that have led careers like I have, that are successful, like, quote unquote, air quotes, successful, like, because you could measure success in a million ways, but like, success to me is like, am I a good person? Am I a good human? Am I a good husband? Am I a good father? And then contributing member to my society. And that's how I measure success. And the ones that are successful beyond what we used to do there is a stronger woman or significant other beside us, like, bottom line. And I believe that to be true. And in using my case, like, Erica and my children are the reason I have been successful, and the reason I'm still on this earth. Because at my lowest in 2016, 17, 18, the only thing that kept me from taking my own life is I loved them more than I knew how to love myself. So I would never have. And I know hopelessness is a feeling that I've felt for periods of my life. And there is no line there between, like, what happens next or not. I know what happens next. It's not really next, though. It could have been me. But the way it manifested in my life was I wanted someone to kill me. So my behavior outside of work, or continuing to stay at work, like, I needed to die on the battlefield, or I needed to die, like, wanting and just putting myself into just the most ridiculous of situations. And because I didn't know how to love myself, and, but I do now. And that is something that I'm working on every day, but I couldn't have ever gotten there if it wasn't for Erica and my children. And that's not me putting that onto them, because I may have done that at periods where I'm like, oh, I'm leaning on them to survive, to thrive. It's just really like honoring them, and then never losing sight of that, like, in my life moving forward, because, like, I wouldn't have any of this if it wasn't for them.
Right.
And any of this being, like, I measure success off of, right? Like, being a good person, that's kept that, and with my relationship with God, like, it's keeping me in the light on this path with the bearing that I've been shown. And that's why I love the fact that you sent me that,
Oh, your buddy check bracelet.
and I'm going to put it on for the show.
Do you know how to do it?
Never take it off. I don't know.
Ziploc.
I'm pretty
Ziploc.
smart though.
Are you? I'm gonna watch you do it and see how smart you are. Oh shit, you got it. Do you know how many people I've had to open those for? Now pull really hard. Really hard. Use those muscles. You got them. I believe in you. There you go.
Yeah. Do you make
Look at
this
Kyle.
in
He's just gonna snap it in half. Yeah, it gets
Uh-oh.
on you. No,
Okay.
don't you worry. Listen, I can get it on bigger boys than you. We'll be all right. I promise. All the way. Keep it going.
It's going.
Now I'm gonna take that ball, put it in your mouth, and pull real tight. Oh, for those that are listening, you guys missed out. Oh, there it is. Oh, Kyle, that makes my heart happy.
All right.
Would your wife think of her necklace?
She loves it.
Does
Thank you
she?
very much. Yeah.
Oh, you're so welcome. Listen, it's not about that's the thing about what I do. God, I just want my people to know that I care. I want them to know that other people are out there. That hopelessness feeling you were just talking about, that feeling of, I don't know, I can't see past the end of the day. I can't see past the hour. That's a real thing, man. That's a super real thing. Every level of the profession, every level of law enforcement, every level of military, whatever you want to call it, first responders, there's moments in our life, whether we like it or not, that stick with us. And that moment of hopelessness, when it shows up, I just don't want people to feel like they're ever alone again. And that's our way of doing it. That thing on your wrist, it's silly, it's small, it's something, but it just knows when you have it, you know that you can call. And that's all that I've ever wanted. It's people to never feel alone again. I don't want people to feel the way I did. I don't want anybody to feel the way a lot of our community feels. And that's our mission. That right there, that silly little bracelet right there, that buddy check makes all the difference to a lot of people.
No, I think it's extremely admirable, and I support that 100%. I think, the big thing is like people are like, oh, well, how do we fix this problem of veteran suicide and this and that? I'm like, or law enforcement, and I'm like, you don't fix it. For one, you just keep the other line open, right? Where and paying attention to, like, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it might just be a fucking duck.
Yeah.
And there's performance indications that you can build into your own, like, training or like work environment, to where, like, you can pattern analysis and develop, over time, paying attention to the human aspects and compassion. To lead is to be able to communicate and to have compassion to others. And you can't communicate without having compassion, and understanding how people learn, individually, and then having ways to hold each other accountable. And in our personal lives, I think it's like, I wasn't ready to receive certain messages through my life, but man, do I not reflect on those as being so profound now, and the people that did that presented them to me. So that, to me, the answer is this: like, I'm just going to say it early and often, and using myself as an example, being vulnerable and humble, and that's how I save lives. Like, where I'm able to talk about, the fear, the unraveling, and how, and using myself with humility, like using that as an example to hold myself accountable, but to help others say, hey man, like, it's okay if you're not okay. It's just, don't stay not okay for periods of time. You have others that can help you where things don't make sense. Like, you need to be able to share that with someone else. And like I said, with your higher power. And that's how you're not alone, because I've felt absolutely alone amongst the crowd over periods of my life. And I was never alone, but I couldn't see that for what it was. And for me, like, if something resonates with one person that I've said that maybe helps alter their path of taking their own life, then I've succeeded on my new mission,
right,
from God. And there's no way to quantify it. So I'm just going to say it and do it. and continue to do it. And some people aren't ready to receive those messages, but guess what? I still say it. And if they'll come back around, and I'll be here on the other side,
If anything, I think the thing that I appreciate the most out of this conversation is that part right there. The reason I say that is for almost 8 years now, I have been screaming at the top of my lungs about veteran suicide before we hit 44, before we were hitting 22. And my one response to when people would say, how is this product going to help our community? It's very simple. No one wants to talk. No one wants to pick up the phone. So if it's on you permanently and you can't take it off, or you choose not to take it off, it's a small thing. I had this on a podcast this week. I had this conversation with Tiffany Hart, and it was very simple. I said, I am coming into the American community from an outsider's perspective. Remember how you just said, I can't stand in that guy's shoes in that room and see that perspective. I'm watching your community. I say your America's community of veterans and going, you have almost 50,000 active nonprofits for veterans in America to date. 50,000. All that needs to be done in order to fix the suicide crisis is for those people to start connecting with one another. You have these beautiful dots of people in every state that don't even know each other exist. You need to start connecting just like the brain does when it does psychedelics. Start connecting the dots. Let the synapses start firing. If you guys all really just utilize the potential of these organizations and had them all talking, and I've been saying this for years, I don't know if there needs to be an event in one location, one time a year, where all the heads of these massive organizations and egos get stripped away and we all sit down together and go, how are we going to do it? How? Because you're there. The tools are there. The groundwork is there. The communication needs to start. That's how you do it. Keep the lines open. Like you said, never shut the door. The door's never shut. And if you can take time and just talk to 2 extra people a day, just 2 or even 1, and you let that person or those 2 people know you can call. And if you can't get a hold of me, here's who you can call. But they need to know the resources are available. They're there. We just need to start all talking.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And it starts with individuals, and then those individuals connect the bigger dots. And then before you know it, we have a syndicate or a network of people and companies and nonprofits that can leave it better than we found it. And that is exactly what I'm doing, whether it's preparedness, firearms, tactical training, active threat response, or my mental health mindset, and like awareness, piece, that it's all happening at the same time for me. Like I will do things that are specific for one or the other, but they're all interconnected.
Right.
Like when you experience them with me, and I just wish that there was more people out there doing that, because it's like, why would I hang on to this experience that I've been given or shown, or put into these environments? The experiences that I've used, the things I've been shown, no one can take away from me. They're mine, but we have a generation of the most capable warriors that we've ever seen. And we're losing them, in the masses to suicide, and whether it's LE or MIL or first responders, period. And that's the part where it's on people like me and others that have the resume, right? To then hit people with the hard truths of everything. And I'm not trying to build a monopoly on any of this. I want us to leave this place better than we found it, because we don't have that much time left, on this earth.
No,
like
we
individually.
don't.
So, but I think I think we're doing it, and it's just let's just keep doing it.
Community is key, my friend. Community is key. And you are a part of my community. And I've been so grateful to get to know you over the past little while. And thanks again to Mark Turner at Overwatch Foundation and all the work that you're doing with them to really, selflessly go and change lives, help people be prepared, hopefully save their own lives. But also help pull individuals out of situations that they should never have had to be in the first place. And I am grateful for not only your friendship, but your time and your willingness to be, the guy with the resume, but the vulnerable guy, the guy that's willing to talk about the stuff that's inside, not just the raw gunning and running and gunning. And I will always hold you to that level of standard. Now that I am in your life, I will make sure that you are doing the things, because you are a part of my community. You are somebody that I see moving forward that's going to continue to change lives. And hopefully not only this episode, but every other episode you do, because you will be back on, but every other thing that you touch, whether it's your family, whether it's those around you, whether it's those that you're training, I hope that you do see that you are a value add to the society. And thank you for not being a liability, but being an asset.
No, thank you. And I appreciate you saying all that. And I believe that we can do a lot together. So
yes, sir. We sure can.
Let's just keep doing it.
We will. Where can everyone find you? Anything about Blu Bearing if they want to train with you, or if they want to contact you and work with you in some other capacity? Where do we find you?
Yeah, the best way to do that is going to be through bluebaringsolutions.com. And on the homepage, there's an inquire for services, and there's a form that you fill out, whether it's training, mindset, speaking, all the things, those drop downs. That's going to that opens the communication line up for us to be able to prioritize everything.
And then where do they find you on social? You are a great follow on social. I will say, I love watching the videos, the training that you do. Yeah,
thank you. So the username for the company is blue_bearing on Instagram, and then my personal business page is Kyle Morgan Actual on social media as well. And then I'm on YouTube and Patreon under Blu Bearing Solutions as well. But all the things are there. If you go to the website, you can see all those things as well.
Well, I appreciate you so much. We'll put everything in the show notes. Everyone else, that's been Kyle Morgan. We'll see you all next week.